morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about supporting employees' mental health and tips for controlling worry and dealing with stress. My name is Beaufort. I'm a health and wellbeing coach here, and I will let our expert panelist introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Cathy Lawson, and I've been working in health and wellbeing for longer than I care to mention, but certainly over the last 15 years. And for 5 of those, I've been a mental health first aid instructor, delivering the Mental Health First Aid England's 2-day, 1-day, half-day awareness raising sessions. And before that, I was also working as a wellbeing manager for a large finance corporate company. And also I did some time working for the NHS-sponsored diabetes prevention programme. So yeah, that's me, all about health and wellbeing and mental health.
Amazing. We should also hopefully be joined by Richard Holmes, the Director of Wellbeing here at Westfield Health. But for now, it'll be myself and Cathy. Just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping. So the webinar is being recorded and you have joined in listen only mode. If you do have any questions, you can type them into the chat box and we'll try to answer as many as we can towards the end. You'll receive a recording of the webinar afterwards by email, and handouts are in the download section. These handouts will be full of different resources that we'll talk about throughout today's webinar. During the webinar, you'll be asked some poll questions as well to include you all in the webinar. The polls are completely anonymous and optional, but we will be sharing the overall results throughout, and they're a really great way of also learning from your peers. A survey should also appear on your screens at the end of the webinar, and it would be great if you could give your feedback, as we can then use this feedback to develop our future webinars. So this week it is Mental Health Awareness Week, and this year's theme is loneliness. With many people working still from home or working in a much more hybrid manner, it can cause a lot of external factors, from living alone to other stresses, moments, worry, or even working situations that can contribute to loneliness. So today we are going to focus on how you can support your employees who are stressed and worried. So in today's webinar, we'll be covering why it's important to support employees who may be dealing with stress and worry, how employees can spot stressed or worried employees, and how managers can reduce workplace stress, how managers can start difficult conversations about stress and mental health, and also offering some practical advice for helping employees to control worry. So let's look at some stats to highlight why we should continue to really focus on supporting our employees' mental health and really help to open up those difficult conversations, to check in with our colleagues and to really show why as employers we should be focusing on this. So our recent research, our changing attitudes to mental health, found that 31% of UK employees took time off work due to mental health in 2021. Mental health days are of cost to UK businesses of 12.6 billion in 2021. 73% of people are worried about the increased cost of living. And the Health and Safety Executive's recent report found that in 2020 and 2021, stress, depression, or anxiety accounted for 50% of all work-related ill health cases. So some really important statistics there, which is going to lead us nicely into our first poll before we do begin this webinar. So, I'm going to launch it and it should appear onto your screens. Have you seen a change in time off due to stress-related illnesses in the past year? And Cathy, I think it's a great time for us to start, really. So why do you think it's so important for us to measure about the change in time off due to stress-related illnesses?
I think, May, that if we measure it, then we know what we're dealing with. And I was just looking at that final stat and the Health and Safety Executive reporting on this, and thinking to myself how these have taken over from traditionally musculoskeletal issues, which would always have been the reason for people taking time off. But now it's really shifted, and I'm sure that the pandemic, most people will realise that the pandemic has played a part in that. And in some ways, whilst there's a real challenge with it and it's caused a lot of difficulty for people, there's also the upside, which is making this whole subject of mental health and depression and anxiety, making it become part of our language, our everyday language, that we can talk about it and organisations can start to take it seriously and focus on it. Particularly when you think about it's costing 12 billion per year, valid reasons why organisations are focusing on this particular subject. So yeah, not surprised really that it's increased.
Yeah, so let's share those results so you can all see them. As you should be able to see on that screen, 50% of you have voted that you believe that time off has increased due to stress-related illnesses in the past year. 33% with it stayed the same, 3% with decreased, and 15% with I don't know. So I feel like those stats, particularly that 50% of it's increased, shows massively how important it is for employers to understand how we can support colleagues with mental health.
Yes, and it's the whole subject when we talk about mental health, it's that fundamental understanding that when we talk about mental health, we talk about good mental health, we talk about poor mental health, and we're talking about preventing as well as what do we do when there are mental health issues and there are illnesses in the workplace. And there needs to be a balance, doesn't there? Putting the right things in place to support and to support employees and build cultures that are there to encourage people not to develop mental health issues in the first place. I think there's always this misunderstanding about the language that when we talk about mental health, it's been synonymous with the services that were always set up to help people that have got problems. And so we associate mental health with must mean poor mental health. But as we know, actually, mental health is also good mental health. It's about well-being. It's being well. So
definitely, and I think it's a great look into it. So kind of relating actually that question on to some of those statistics we saw right at the start and the Health and Safety Executives Report, which found that in 2020 and 2021, stress, depression, or anxiety accounted for 50% of work-related ill health cases. So, Cathy, what are some of the common signs that managers can look out for of stress?
So, there's a long list here. So, finding people that are struggling to cope, struggling to concentrate, withdrawing, changing their normal behaviour. Maybe they're normally social and outgoing, and now they're doing the opposite. Making silly mistakes. Mental health issues affect people's memories. So forgetting things, taking time off with niggling little health issues, we've got this thing called leaveism now, which is where people are starting to use leave holidays when they're actually sick because they don't want it to be recorded on their HR record that actually they've taken any time off for sickness. And sometimes that's driven because the sickness policies are not particularly very good. And that's another thing that organisations can do is make sure that they have got really good policies in place that are supporting people. So not taking breaks, what else? Overcompensating, so almost overworking because they're not feeling great. So maybe they're staying longer because they can't concentrate. So, and then it leads to things like presenteeism, where you've got people present and no one's home, as I say. So they're there in the workplace working away when really they should be at home, taking some downtime. Being snappy, emotional, tired. The medical profession have this term for people who are tired all the time. They call them a TAT patient, tired all the time. People that are turning up going, oh, I'm so tired, you know, when actually there's something else that's going on. If you notice people are using coping strategies like coming in, maybe smelling of alcohol, maybe they're smoking more than they did, worse, using recreational drugs, overeating or not eating, I think the key thing to remember is you're looking for what's changed. And I'm very aware of how challenging it is when we're working in these ways on these type of forums. And so what are you going to notice when you're working like this? Is it that people don't want to put their cameras on, that they seem a bit disengaged, they don't want to speak about anything? And it's sometimes the communication around these sessions, they're a bit snappy and short in their communication, or maybe they're looking disheveled and you look at the background and you think, oh, that's not normally them. You're looking for what's different and what's changed. So yeah, lots of things in there. And I think, you know, hybrid working's here to stay. So it is about becoming a lot more aware of the things to notice. So
I think that's a great list of like starting point, and kind of linking to what you've just said there. I think I completely agree. I think there still is that stigma and that fear of having a sick day for mental well-being when we're so quick to be fine to call in for physical well-being or think other things that are going on in our life. And creating that conversation is a great starting point, and things like this webinar and having HR professionals and managers come to listen is a really good starting point. So linking onto that, what can managers and HR teams do to really reduce workplace stress and start creating that conversation on mental well-being?
So I think the starting point is to think about the culture of the organisation. How comfortable are managers and leaders actually talking about this subject? How comfortable are they talking about their own mental health? There's this concept of being vulnerable, and vulnerability is actually a strength, contrary to what we might think. And if managers and leaders are able to risk being a little bit vulnerable and sharing what's going on for them, it sends a message about the culture of organisations. This is what we do around here. This is how it is. So you can create a little mini culture, a little culture bubble in your own teams, if you like, which is about, well, this is how we do it around here. We have regular wellbeing check-ins. We have we don't have a problem talking about my depression in the same way that I talk about my broken leg or my broken arm. And when people come back to work from being off with maybe anxiety or depression, we're okay to say, how are you? Let's have a chat about it, and not stumble over, well, I don't really want to mention it because I'm going to feel really awkward or uncomfortable. And I think also it's for managers and leaders to be a lot more aware, and I think this is in your handouts, that there is a pressure point for organisations, and it's important for managers and leaders to notice, where are your people sitting on this pressure curve? You know, are they about to go into burnout? And it's quite interesting, I was reading something the other day that there was some research done quite a few years ago, and they were linking loneliness, theme of the mental, oh, there we go, the pressure.
Just make it pop up.
yeah, there you go, as if by magic. And they were linking exhaustion and burnout to loneliness, and saying that what happens is that as people become more and more exhausted and burnt out by too much pressure, and here we're seeing it when they're going into strain and burnout, then that then can lead to loneliness, because the more exhausted they feel, the lonelier they feel. So there's a really nice link there, and the importance therefore of organisations creating cultures that are able to talk about this subject and to exchange ideas about it, and to recognise that people are not invincible, that there is that optimal performance, and if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and we're all guilty of thinking that we're Superman or Superwoman, where we get the pants on the outside of our trousers and we just think, woo, I'm just going to keep going. And we're not designed to do that. You know, people look at this model and think, well, you know, I need to be in stretch because that's optimal. Well, yes, it is, but actually it's also okay to be in comfort on occasion, because that's your recovery. The worst place is in boredom. That's just horrible. But bore out, as it says on there, that's a horrible, apathetic place to be. And we've all been there when you're just not motivated to do anything. But being in comfort, recovering, going into stretch is great, and sort of oscillating around that sort of area. What you don't want is to be pushing into strain and burnout, because that's a really horrible place to be. And that's going to increase the likelihood of things like mental health issues and illnesses and loneliness, which is the theme of this week. So yeah, love this model.
It's a really, really interesting model, and I completely agree with what you've just said there, that it has to be a conversation from this kind of that head up. If managers and HR professionals aren't having those open conversations about mental health, it's going to be so much more unlikely that employees and colleagues are going to reach out and talk about and start those conversations. And conversations is really that great starting piece. And really understanding models like what you've just gone through with that performance curve there, Cathy, is a great starting point to really understanding how we can support our employees and really open up that conversation. But I think what's also quite important for us to look at is, for those of you who are listening to this webinar right now, are busy managers, you're HR professionals who I'm sure must feel very stressed and worried. I work within the HR team myself, so completely understand. And it's not just looking after our employees, but also making sure that you're looking after yourselves as well, because we can't be there as professionals to support employees and colleagues without also just taking a step back for a second and looking after yourselves, making sure you're in that right headspace. And just from my own means, breathing exercises has been something that's helped me a lot with my own mental well-being and within stressful situations. So something I demonstrated on quite a few webinars for Westfield Health for our employees has been some really simple breathing exercises I wanted to quickly show you. You will find all of these in your handouts in the resources sections. But one of these simple methods is something like square breathing. So when you are faced with a challenging situation, we have to make sure as HR professionals and managers, our head is in that right space. So something as simple as square breathing. So you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And it just adjusts that focus from that mindset of, oh goodness, what's happening here? I don't know how to handle this situation, and really brings you back to that pinpoint kind of in the present moment. So that's one way, a great way of kind of immediate, bring that heart rate down, let's get our mind back focused where we need to be and calm ourselves. But Cathy, have you got any other techniques that people on this webinar could put into practice when they do find themselves in a really stressful situation that could perhaps just help them in that immediate moment for themselves, or even for them to be able to share to their employees?
Yeah, so yes, I have, and I practice square breathing. And what's interesting, as part of a yoga move as well, is that when you practice it, you can actually start to increase how long you hold your breath for. So you said use 4, so then you can get it up to 5 and then to 6, and then it really puts you into that calm, almost meditative state. So it does work. I can testify to that. So it really does work. So yeah, just a couple of things I wanted to add to what you were saying before about managers as well and culture of organizations, is that it's good practice for managers to conduct regular well-being check-ins with their staff. It's a good thing to do, and not to hide behind performance, which leads into what you're saying there, that if managers are doing regular well-being check-ins, they will notice when they need more of these things. So like the breathing technique that you've described, there's also, some of you may have downloaded Headspace, is a great app to get involved in mindfulness. I really like it, Headspace, because literally you stick your headphones in and they do short sessions, 5-10 minutes, and you can change the voice. You know, there's nothing more irritating than that voice that grates on you and you think, oh no, I really can't listen to this. You can select male, female, Scottish, American, all sorts of different voices you can pick. And Headspace give you different topics. So whether it's you're struggling to sleep or you're feeling a little bit anxious, it gives you the topics that you want to focus on. So Headspace is a great app. So breathing techniques, always, they do work, they do make a difference. You're taking more oxygen, which is all of the cells in your body need oxygen to perform. So that's really good. Taking exercise is a great way, and by that we don't mean that you have to think about running a marathon, but you might just want to go out and just take a walk for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes. Being outside in the fresh air means that you're getting some vitamin D, and that's really good for your serotonin and your mental health. Drink more water. I always have this little bottle on my desk here that even I think it's 2% of dehydration affects your concentration. And when you start to feel thirsty, you are already dehydrated. So actually drinking regularly, just having it there on your desk is a great thing to do, because if you start to get that real tired, lull feeling in an afternoon, then yeah, okay, maybe that you've been burning the midnight oil and partying a bit too much, but it can just be that you're dehydrating. So drink some water. That makes a difference. If you're feeling yourself getting uptight and you want to rip somebody's head off, then walk away. Count to 100. Know that your little inner chimp has come out to play. Know that whatever's going to come out of your mouth is probably not what you really want to say. So walk away, take some space, because then you will be able to choose what you say instead of saying the thing that might be limiting your career. So, and I think also, don't be afraid, going back to that vulnerable thing, don't be afraid to ask for help. If you're not coping, if you're struggling, then go and tell somebody that you trust, go and have that conversation. And once you start talking about what's going on for you, it changes shape. And by doing that, it helps you understand what's going on. And if someone's listening to you and feeling about what you're saying and offering some understanding, some empathy, then it normalizes it for you, makes you feel like you're not just losing the plot. So I think all of those things, I'm sure people here today have got their own ideas of what they do just to as techniques really for helping people. So yeah. And we could go on, couldn't we, May? We could go on.
Oh, definitely. I think that's a great list of like some techniques that we could share. And kind of linking back to what you said a moment ago, Cathy. Oh, hello, Richard. Just going back to what you said a moment ago, Cathy, when we were talking about one-to-ones and making sure we're having those regular check-ins, something myself and my manager do is we started to not just use our monthly one-to-one check-ins as a time just to talk specifically about work and tasks and things going on, but also to check in for my mental health and to open the conversation up. It's not just how are you, May, but you know, what's going on in daily life. And a question that's come through links really nicely with that. So how can we best encourage, and Richard, feel free to jump in, how can we best encourage and support managers to just feel comfortable in having these conversations with mental health without just pushing someone to go towards HR? And a means of just a quick thing of something we did at Westfield is we actually created like a little mini mental health guide that is on our intranet. And in that just has lots of things about stuff like our EAP. It talks about how colleagues can begin to open up a conversation with their managers by sort of what questions to ask when they want to talk about their mental health to their manager. But any other things you can think of, Cathy?
I'm not sure, Richard, if you've got sound yet. So shall I carry on? I'm not sure. Yeah, don't think that he has. So yeah, we're carrying on. I think that, remember that I think the biggest problem with managers and leaders having these conversations with their people is that fear that the person's going to say, I'm not okay. And then the manager, who's often paid to come up with solutions and to fix things, is going to have to start thinking, what we're going to do then. And I think, remember, this is if you take nothing away from this webinar, remember this: we don't need to fix people. And so the likelihood is that you're not going to be able to solve that issue for them. It's like expecting yourself to be a paramedic or a nurse or a doctor and have the answer to someone's pain in their arm. So what is going to be helpful is to listen, to understand, to normalize, and then ask, what do you need? What do you need from me? What can I do? And if it's, you know, managers and leaders are in such a unique position to really help and support people, and not to underestimate that, and not to, you know, say, oh, this is an HR issue. I get loads of HR people training in these courses, you know. So making sure that managers appreciate it's their responsibility to not shy away from asking. Sometimes we've got this thing about not asking personal questions in the UK, haven't we? Well, better not ask that, it's a bit intrusive. And yet what's so difficult when we're working like this, you don't have those water cooler moments or that time around the coffee machine where you might notice somebody limping or something, and you could ask that question. What I would say is maybe risk on these type of forums asking a little bit more personal. So how are you coping with the lockdown or the COVID and the pandemic and your work situation? How are you finding things? Oh, I remember that, you know, you've lost someone close to you recently. How are you coping? You know, it's just being a little bit more willing, I think, to be empathic. And remember, there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is, oh, they're there, it'll be all right tomorrow, you know, well, at least you don't have to worry about that anymore. Empathy is much more, it requires a bit more of us. It's much more about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and imagining what it feels like. And we have all had the gamut of feelings as human beings. So somewhere down the line, if someone's saying to you, well, I'm feeling a bit hurt or I'm feeling upset, we've had that feeling. We know what that feels like. And empathy is simply saying, yeah, I can imagine that's really tough for you. It's not, by the way, a bit of a pet hate, saying, I know how you feel. Oh, it's not, because nobody knows how somebody else feels, do they? So it is much more about not fixing, being willing to ask some questions. If you've noticed that things have changed with people, stick to the facts, but be kind about it. Say, I'm concerned about you. You know, this is not you. Things have changed. Would you like to say what's going on? Another top tip as well about managers at engaging with people is that if you ask somebody once and they say, I don't want to talk about it right now, and you ask them again another time and they still say, no, I really don't want to talk about it. The third time, you are either not the right person or it's not the right time. And so you could say, great opportunity to say, we've got an EA, as May was saying, we've got an EAP, Employee Assistance Programme, or we've got other things in our organisation to support you. So this is how you tap into it. You can say, I'm going to signpost you to this service that may help you. I encourage you to go and see your GP. That might be an idea. And managers, make no bones about it, managers are at the sharp end, aren't they? The head's above the parapet. And so if you are talking to someone and you know that something's wrong and you've asked the rule of three, you've asked them 3 times and they're still saying, I don't want to talk about it, then you don't really have anywhere else to go other than to talk about performance. But I think a good manager understands to put performance on one side whilst they have that conversation about well-being, so that you don't lose that great performer, because people don't suddenly stop performing overnight. If they've been a good performer and their attendance has been very good, then they don't suddenly become unknowledgeable, de-skilled and demotivated overnight. It's something else that's going on. And so let's just see if we can tease that out. And yeah, I think it's good practice for managers to ask these questions. So
I agree, and I think having those support resources widely available for employees as well, and even like something as simple as a document of questions that employees can ask their managers, or great starting points if they want to talk about their mental health, and having those policies readily available so that it's so much easier than kind of going and being unsure what questions they want to ask their manager or how to bring up a conversation on mental health, if there's almost like a starting point for it. And someone, a bit of a question, but how can team members and managers, how can they support their colleagues whose stress and mental health that's kind of declining at that point, that's related to their personal life rather than just work? Is there a means of drawing the line on the conversation when it's at work but it's about their personal life that's going on? Or do you think that in those one-to-ones we need to be having that full conversation, because at the end of the day, well-being doesn't just mean about supporting their well-being at work. It should be a bigger conversation than that. What are your thoughts on that?
So the first thing that comes to mind is boundaries of your role as a manager. But I talk about this a lot when I'm training mental health first aiders, boundaries of your role as a mental health first aiders. We are not counsellors, we are not therapists, and you are not trying to create a therapeutic relationship with your member of staff. So being empathic doesn't turn you into a counsellor. So, and I think what is also important to remember is that we are not responsible for other people's lives. We are only responsible for our role as a manager, as a leader, as a colleague, to ask questions and to help and to signpost. If you find yourself in a position where you've said to someone, like, here's my mobile number, feel free to contact me, and now they're contacting you over the weekend, in the evening, and you're now thinking, oh, you're so overwhelmed, and you have inadvertently encouraged people to become dependent on you, and that's not, and it's difficult not to do, because it's very powerful when people say, thank you so much for listening to me, I really appreciate what you're doing, you're the only person that understands, please don't tell anybody. Well, that's not actually helpful for anybody, it's disempowering for the person. So I think there is that boundary as your role, and know where the boundary is. So if you see that somebody's struggling and struggling and struggling, and you've been supporting them and supporting, and you've been having conversations, and now you get this sense of, oh, this feels a little bit more like counselling or therapy, signpost them. They need to be going to get therapy or somewhere else where they can get the EAP, for example, the right help and support. It's not going to be helpful to either you or for them, because something you said earlier, your own self-care is self-preservation. It's so important. We can't help people when we're trying to feed from an empty cup. You've heard that expression. So I think, does that answer the question? I saw this in the box about team members. I think it is, team doesn't feel confident finding a team leader about mental health. What can the team leader do? I think we also have to be, we have to put our egos on one side sometimes and think, maybe I'm not the right person. So if you've got a mental health first aider, they are a great resource to use and to signpost people to access. EAPs we've already mentioned. So I think we have to remember that not everybody is going to want to come and talk to us, and that's okay. Just put your ego on one side and go, right, okay, maybe it's somebody else. Rather than where do you draw the line? Yeah, I think we've answered that. Don't turn it into a counselling session. So, are you there, Richard? Can we hear you? We can see you.
Hopefully, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Finally.
Yes. Sorry, everyone. Had a few technical issues.
Don't worry. Well, we're just wonderful. Well, we're glad to have you. Just while we have just been talking about some of those difficult conversations and opening up a conversation about mental health in the workplace and some different techniques that we can use to support ourselves, but also employees as well. So it's going to lead us very nicely onto our second poll. So let's talk about how, or have any of you implemented any extra initiatives or support in the past year to help employees cope with worry or stress? So just while we are talking about this, while I'm just letting the results come in, Richard, just a question for you. I mean, firstly, feel free to introduce yourselves to everybody. Also, how would you approach a conversation if you think your manager might be struggling themselves?
Thanks, mate, and hi everyone. My name is Richard Holmes. I'm the Director of Wellbeing at Westfield Health. And that's a really good question, mate. I think we've just got to be open, transparent. I think the key thing is understanding each individual that's in your team, understanding how to approach them on a particular issue. I would keep it personally, I tend to keep things informal initially, just to be able to open up a simple conversation, rather than going straight to the point about what it's about. So understanding your people, understanding how to approach each individual, what makes them tick. And that's going to be different, isn't it, May, for different people within your team. So you know, it comes down, if you've got a team of 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, it's understanding each of those individuals and how best to start that conversation with them. And that'll be based upon your past experience, your relationship with them, what you understand about them in terms of what will automatically make them put the shields up, what will allow them just to relax, sit back and actually then start to have a conversation. I think the thing is as well is not, and Cathy, you might have a view on this, is not try and press things too hard too quickly. You've got to allow people to open up at their own pace, and it's got to come from them. Otherwise, you won't get a truthful answer. People will distance themselves, and once blocked, it's very difficult then to take that wall back down again.
I think, yeah, do you know what, Richard? That's a really good point, because trust is such a big deal. And so building that relationship and trust, particularly around a subject that's a bit more personal, takes time and effort and energy to do that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Definitely, and I think having those things in place to implement are really important when it does come to creating those conversations and knowing what we can put in place. So just sharing the poll results from the poll that we have just done there, it's great to see that 54% have implemented some extra initiatives or support in the past year to help employees cope with worry and stress, and then 31% saying no, they haven't, and 15% saying that they are not sure. So just want to open this up to you both when it comes to kind of related to this poll, but taking other industries, so things like construction industry, there is sometimes a bit of a stigma about acknowledging that you have mental health struggles. So how can you engage a workplace that can sometimes feel predominantly quite male, to start opening conversation on mental health?
do you want me to pick this up, Richard, or do you want to go? Go, you're gonna.
No, I was just about to say that you've got, again, it's having the right approaches for the culture and environment that you're operating in, and often having the right, if you like, the right people to lead those conversations and to open up things that particular workforce will relate to. Cathy, you were gonna jump in there, I think.
Yeah, I was, because I've trained a lot of people in construction as mental health first aid.
I thought you might, yeah.
Yeah. And so the first thing is get some mental health first aiders trained in that environment, and they don't have to be men, but if you've got a predominantly male environment, then train men to be mental health first aiders is a good thing. And then I think the other things that I've come across over the years is that people start to introduce it slowly with the language that they use on a daily basis. So, for example, you get toolbox talks quite often in construction industry. So when you're giving a toolbox talk, start to thread in conversations about well-being and mental health. Start to introduce things around your diet, your sleep, your activity, and then you can very slowly start to link in. And of course, if you're not doing these things, it affects your mental health. We know in construction that, it's shocking stats of 55% of people are thinking about suicide. Right? It's just shocking. So, and there's lots of reasons. It's a very hierarchical environment in construction. There's lots of other reasons. But I think being male dominated doesn't mean that you can't slowly but surely, and I think it's understanding you're not going to change it like that. You're not going to change it overnight. But it is challenging the language. Language is a big one. I hear lots of people that have nicknames, and they're not kind, nice, hello, gorgeous, you're looking amazing, or they're not nice nicknames. They're usually derogatory in that. Understand, it has an impact on people, and sometimes a negative impact. So just be a bit more mindful of how you talk to each other, how you talk about this language. And if you see people getting picked on, call it out and don't allow it to continue, because it has an impact. So.
And I actually had, a little bit of a story, I guess, to relate to that. My partner, he recently became a mental health first aider, and he works in a very male-dominated industry. And something he started to pick up on is just having someone that was qualified, is that even though it wasn't having monthly one-to-ones or those full time to sit down and talk about mental health, he found those little moments, things like having when they sit down for their coffee break or their tea break, that in those times people would open up and start to talk about, this is, oh, this is stressful going on in my personal life. And it's even those key conversations happening right there in those moments that you call them the water cooler moments, can be really changing and identify kind of what's going on in the workplace. And I think that links quite nicely to one of the stats that we shared right at the start, Richard, was on some recent research that found that the majority of people are worried about things like cost of living increases, as well as workplace factors. There are other external factors that can be impacting people's mental health, such as financial worries. What can managers do to really support employees who are worried about those factors that we might not have any control over? And are there any tips for trying to manage that worry?
Well, mate, I think everybody on this call will appreciate that if an individual's worried about something, it affects their performance. And I'm not just referring to performance at work, work-related tasks. It impacts on your relationships, what happens in your personal life, those types of things. But what we as managers need to appreciate is, and it was really good that you're referring to some of these external influences like cost of living, is that as managers, we've got to recognise that emotional baggage, and I don't mean that as a derogatory term, is carried between work and home and between home and work. So our work worries will influence our home life, and likewise, our worries in our personal home life will affect our work life. Yeah. So I think the other thing to recognise, everybody on the call to recognise, is worry is a human condition. It actually has a benefit, because from the old survival instinct piece, that the ability to worry creates a stimulation which then can help you anticipate events coming up in the future and prepare yourself for them. Yeah, we don't often view it in that positive light, and that's because we tend to worry so much. And there's lots of research that's been done in the past that actually shows that the vast majority of what we worry about never even happens. So we'll worry about what's going to happen in the next minute, the next day, the next week, the month, the year. We even worry about the consequences of what we've already done. And quite often all those things never materialize, apart from the past pieces. Now, what worry does then is, and Cathy will attest to this, is it then creates anxiety. And it's that anxiety that is both generally unhealthy and that will also impact on how we perform. And when I say performance, I'm not referring just to work, I'm referring to our relationships and everything we do in life. Now, one of the traits of people that are considered more resilient to pressure and worry is they tend to have this idea of, why worry about things I can't control? Okay, and I know we've got a really good resource on that to go with the webinar. And sometimes when people say that, it feels a little bit false. It feels a little bit flippant. And that's because more resilient people take that attitude, why worry? If I can't control it, why should I even bother worrying about it? Because they're not being flippant. They've actually got a more positive mindset than the rest of us. So what they're looking at is their emphasis is on, right, how do I influence the outcomes of potentially this situation that's going to happen? Or what do I need to do before meeting this situation to adapt around that situation so that I can best deal with it? So it's that more positive approach to dealing with things that are of a concern or a worry to you that they take, and that's the way they act. And that's really, really useful in terms of probably one of the top worries that everybody on this call will recognize straight away, that we all worry about most, is change. Is things changing? We don't like things changing. Now, we know more resilient people deal with change better, because, as I said before, they actually prepare for it. They look at how they can adapt. Cathy, do you want to touch on change a bit more specifically?
Yes, I always, some of you may have heard me say this, the only people that like change is a wet baby. You know, human beings do not like change. And I think that what can happen is, and you'll see it in your resources, we've got the circles of control there, and Richard was just talking about those, is that procrastination is a big one, and procrastination leads to more worrying, and more worrying leads to more anxiety. And so I use this little mnemonic that says, when I'm thinking about what I'm worrying about or what's going on in my life, then I go, okay, can I control it? Yeah, I can. Okay, well, do something about it then if you can. Okay, if I can't control it, then can I influence it? Richard was saying this. Then yes, I can. This is the hardest box, I have to say. This is the hardest circle to think about how you influence it, because you might need a little bit of help from somebody else to recognize that it's in your power. And then if it's in the outer circle, which is about something that you can't control and you know you can't control it, then leave it. So the little mnemonic is lid. Leave it, influence it, or do it. You either leave it, influence it, or do it. Because if you can't do anything about it, then what is the point of worrying about it and creating this level of anxiety? But remember, procrastination is the killer that stops people from dealing with change. So focus your energy on the things you can do.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. That was really interesting conversation there towards the end. And I think a lot of really key things have been highlighted. So I think this is going to be a great time for us to start opening up some questions from the audience. So to everybody listening, feel free to type any questions in the chat and we'll do our best to try and answer as many as we can. So question for either of you, feel free to answer, but what about how could we support mental health when someone is absent and not at work, and how can we support when they are returning too?
Do you want me to do that, Richard?
This is clearly your bag, Cathy.
Yeah, my bag on that one. So yeah, it looks like it's come from Claire. So yeah, I think the first thing is to remember that it's important to support people when they're absent. And again, sometimes there's an avoidance because it's mental health, and therefore there's a concern about, I don't know what to say, I'm going to make it worse. That's not an excuse for not having contact with people in the same way that you would keep in contact with them if they were off with a flu or COVID or broken arm, broken leg. So that's the first thing. Make sure you do support them. And also remember that encouraging people to come back to work with a mental health issue is a good thing to do, because think about it in the same way of a physical illness. Let's say that, let's use an extreme, someone has cancer and they say, well, yes, I'll need some chemotherapy or radiotherapy and some time off, but I still would like to come back to work and be around my colleagues. And workplace is a good place for people to be, and it's the same with mental health as well. So even if people can't deliver at 100%, if they're delivering at 70% or 60 or 50%, better that they're there in the workplace with all the support that's around them, because if they are there, then they're less likely to stay off longer. If they are off and absent with something going on, the longer they stay off, the longer they will stay off. So it's better for everybody that you actually encourage people to come back into the workplace, and that you make the reasonable adjustments that are required in the same way that you would for a physical illness, to make sure that that person can come back and be part and parcel of the workplace. So hopefully that answers.
I think, Cathy, if I could just add to that, I think one of the things that we've probably all recognised over the last couple of years is the importance of work to our social well-being. Yeah. And when we're looking at our mental health, our physical health, we need to consider, if you like, the holistic approach we take to getting better or dealing with situations. And quite often having that access to that social network, having contact with people is a huge sort of lift for people that are not in the right place physically or mentally and just need that support. You may well be providing that individual with support, not knowing it, just by being there, just by listening to them, just by having a conversation about something completely not related to what they're going through. So never underestimate the importance of the sort of social fabric around an individual and how that supports them in all aspects of life.
And Richard, if I may as well, this brings us right back to where we started, of the subject of loneliness as well. And there's a lot of information around this week, of course, because of this theme. And what you will see as you start to look at the information is that there's this consistent message, which is reach out to people, network with people, have conversations with people, create infrastructure in organizations where people can connect, because it's the connection that makes the difference, that helps with loneliness. And as Richard, you're saying there, about the social interaction makes a difference to, and we know that loneliness is such a major contributor to people's mental health and their stress and their pressure. So it's a nice way of bringing it all together there.
Definitely, I agree, a nice full circle. And just before we do wrap up, final question. We have talked a lot about mental health first aiders today and the benefits that can have on a workplace. So to either of you, how does a person go about training as a mental health first aider? Just a nice quick one before we do wrap up.
Okay, well, sorry, Richard, I'm doing all the talking now. But
okay.
Basically,
I came in late, I'll stay quiet.
You contact Westfield and you ask them when their next course is, and you can either have a face-to-face 2-day course delivered, or you can have it delivered online. And yeah, and the online version depends how you want it to pan out. It can go over 4 sessions.
The other thing to point out there, Cathy, is some organisations will be large enough that it suits them to have a course dedicated to their people. For those organisations that are smaller or just need individuals going on refresher courses, then we also have open courses where organisations can buy 1 or 2 or 3 tickets to that course so that they've got the access.
Excellent.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both. We have come towards the end of this webinar, and thank you everyone for taking the time today for joining us. And thank you again to our panelists for sharing their expertise. There are the free resources in the handout section on the screen, so feel free to have a look through those. And we'd really appreciate your feedback. You should see a link to a survey in your browser window when you do leave today's webinar. And then you'll also receive an email shortly with a link to the survey and the recording of the webinar. If you would like to speak with one of our health and wellbeing consultants about supporting wellbeing in your organisation, then please speak with your account manager if you do have one, or you can contact us by email through businessinquiries@westfieldhealth.com, which should be on our screen. So again, thank you everyone, and a thank you to our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.